Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan, and today is a very exciting day because we get our Ford 302 block back from the machine shop, and now it has been transformed into our 347 stroker. So yes, our 302 has been transformed into a 347, and what does that mean exactly? Well, the reason I say that is you're going to need a stroker crankshaft, which I've left a link down below in the description of the one we're using. It's a forged unit sent over by Summit Racing. And your block has to be clearanced for that crankshaft and your connecting rods because a lot of the geometry is now changed. So that has to be put through a mill where they can clearance out some of the inner workings of the block. And that is absolutely necessary if you are going to run a 347 stroker. If you're just going to go regular 302, you don't have to do that. Just use the regular crankshaft, have that machine 10 under and get 10 under bearings. Then you can follow along too, and you're building a 302 instead of a 347, but they are essentially the same thing except for those two key differences. Before we go any further, I want to thank our sponsor, Summit Racing. They have been absolutely incredible, not only on this build, but our GMLS build as well. Link to that playlist is down below. That is our Summit sponsored LS series. That would not have happened without Summit's amazing support. They haven't sent us any money, but they have sent us an absolute colossal amount of super good parts. Not to mention, they're sponsoring this awesome build. They're the whole reason we're able to make this into an awesome forged stroker kit and really get some great power out of this small block. So for all your speed parts, go to summitracing.com. So in today's video, we're gonna focus on the 3 C's of engine building. That's cleaning, camshaft, and crankshaft. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in. So we're back, and we have our small block Ford back from the machine shop. And before we get to work, you just want to kind of generally inspect it and give it a nice visual inspection, make sure the machine work is all complete, make sure you have your head locating dowels on here. Sometimes they forget these, and that's really not a big deal. You can just either buy them or request them, and you can just put them right here and tap them with a hammer. It's really easy. And then you just kind of want to look around and make sure that the machine work is done properly. There isn't any kind of big, scratches or galls or anything. And then on the sides, make sure they replace all the 3 freeze plugs on both sides, because that's another thing we asked them to do. And they even painted it. Check that out. It's an old Ford blue, which is pretty cool. It's going to match the rest of the theming of the engine, which is awesome. And also make sure that they replaced our cam bearings and that the cam bearing hole down here is located just above the oil well for the oil supply for the cam bearings, because if this is off, your cam won't get oil, which is super bad. We can see right there that there is a hole in the bearing that goes right into an oil supply. There's even one on the side right there. You can't quite see, but it is. And make sure that that's the same for all the bearings going back. So here's one of the mains where the bearing is going to sit. This big hole is the main oil feed for the system. And one of the main bearings is going to sit in here, and it has kind of like a trough in it. And then that can feed our camshaft. And you can see down here where my finger is, you can see right through it. And that is how oil is going to get into there. So make sure that you can see through it like this on all 5 mains. I also wanted to point out that I've already removed the main caps like I've showed in a previous video, so we can get to washing. All right, so now we're gonna wash our engine just like we washed our big block and our LS. And we're gonna do that with some Tide in a bucket. I like using Tide because I know it's a non-abrasive detergent and it's going to degrease things very gently. So we can just grab some of that. And make sure you're as thorough as possible. Go down each and every cylinder hole. Clean all the deck surfaces. You can't be too thorough. See, look at that. That already came off. So you want to soap it up, get it nice and clean, and don't be afraid to spend some time making sure that you're getting it very clean. This will also remove any kind of really small metal chips that might be in there from the machining process, because they're cutting metal when they are machining your engine, and sometimes little teeny tiny bits can get missed, and that can end up in bearing surfaces, which is obviously very bad. So make sure you are as thorough as possible. So now we have the engine flipped over. Again, get every nook and cranny you can. You can even grab some very cool bottle brushes and go down into every oil gallery you can find. See, that was pretty dirty. Oh yeah, there's a lot of dirt coming out of there. So it is really important to keep all the oil galleries and passages and little holes clean. I'm not going to show you every single one, but you get the gist of it. There's also ones located in the front and the rear of the engine, so just go hog wild. Make sure everything is very, very clean, and keep everything wet, because if it dries, it has a chance of flash rusting, so keep everything wet until we're ready to dry it off. So here's one of our oil galleries, and they actually make really long bottle brushes. I'll try to leave a link below in the description for. And you just want to clean that out as much as you can. Very cool. You can even take a hose and blast in there to really flush her out. I'm not kidding. Be really thorough. It'd be a real bummer to spend all this money and do all this time and work, and then a little teeny tiny metal chip you could have gotten out now causes you problems. Okay, now that our engine is nice and soaked up, we can grab our hose and clean off all our suds. Now that our suds are gone, we can grab some compressed air and dry everything off. Okay, so now our engine's pretty dry, and what we're gonna do is just hose it down with WD-40. This is gonna prevent it from rusting, which it will do pretty much instantly. Any surface that's not painted, which is basically just the outside. Don't be too afraid of using too much. Really get it covered in WD. You really don't want this thing rusting and all that machine work going to waste, basically. And make sure you hit both sides. Just drown it in WD-40. You can't use too much. Make sure it gets into all the lifter wells, cylinder bores, bearing surfaces, the whole shebang. Hose it down. There we go. So here we have our original camshaft that's tiny, boo tiny, and then we have this. This is our brand new camshaft sent over by Summit Racing. It is part number SUM-3601. They included all the information on this really cool sticker, so maybe you can just kind of slap this on your inside of your glove box and you'll always have your cam information. It's kind of cool. And there's all our cam information if you want to pause the video and take a look at that. There is an entire science behind which cam is right for your application. I just trust the guys at Summit. They have a great tool on their website. Link is down below in the description. And when I typed in all our parameters, this bad boy is what came up. And you can see how much taller the cam is in my left hand than my right. So we know we're going to get more lift, which basically means we're going to get more power. Also on the bottom of our sticker, you'll see that it has a firing order. Keep this in mind when you are putting your ignition together, because Ford small blocks use 2 different firing orders typically. So this is going to be our guy. So before we get to installing this bad boy, I also want to point out that we have the short dowel installed. That came pre-installed. Sometimes you might want a longer dowel, but we don't in this application. What we're going to do next before we install it is sauce it up with the included camshaft installation assembly lube. And you cannot use too much. So what we're going to do is apply this Moly assembly lube on all of our lobes, and don't be afraid to use too much. You can't over lube, you can under lube, and bad things, really bad things happen when you do. You can use your finger and rub all over the lobe surface on each and every single lobe. Once we get all our lobes sauced up with our Moly, we want to go ahead and apply that liberally to the distributor gear as well. Make sure it really gets in there. You don't want that gear eating its counterpart. Perfect. Look how nice and sauced up all our lobes are. Once we have all our lobes nice and sauced up with our Moly that came with our cam, we can go ahead and grab our Permatex Ultra Slick. This stuff is great. I've used it a bunch and it is proven. And we can do that on our bearing surfaces. Sauce that up. Some people use Permatex Ultra Slick for everything, but I like to put the heavier lube on where the lifters ride and then this lighter stuff where the bearings is. So now you can see that we have all the gray stuff on our lobes and all the red stuff on our bearings. Before we install this bad boy, I want to go over that the machine shop has already installed our cam plug right here. They don't always do that, so you got to make sure that that is installed. If they haven't, take it off the stand, and then you can just tap it in place with a large socket and a hammer. And they also replaced these 2 oil galley plugs for us. Again, they don't always do that, so make sure that those 3 items are installed. And before we put our camshaft in, I'm going to grab some more of our best friend Permatex Ultra Slick, and we're going to apply some to our fingers, and we're going to apply it to the bearing surfaces in here on all of the bearing journals. And you want to make those nice and lubricated. Everything needs lube, and do that on all 5 of our journals here. All right, all our journals are nice and lubricated, so everything has plenty of lubrication, and now we can gently slide our camshaft. While we're putting our camshaft in, go ahead and check the moly lube on every single lobe. It is really important. Each one of those is nice and sauced up. In fact, we have a little bit of a dry spot there, so I will fix that. All right, that dry spot is nice and rectified, so now we can gingerly put our camshaft in. So we just want to gingerly put our camshaft in. Once we get to this stage, we can support it. This is why I prefer to put camshafts in first. A lot of builders will put them in basically last, but we have the luxury of having the bottom end out, so why not do it this way so we can support it as we're moving it through the engine. Just be really careful and really ginger. If it's not going, don't force it. Try to realign things to make sure all the surfaces become parallel, because once they do, it'll slide in nice and easy, I promise. Ooh. That's good. And there we go. Nice and in place. It looks fantastic. So what we can do is we can spin. I'm just grabbing the front of the cam here. And we can just turn it and look over our lobes to see if there's any dry spots. So this is another check of that. And it looks like all ours are nice and sauced up. All right, so our next step is to put in our crankshaft, but before we do that, we need to put the engine side of our bearings in. We have our bearings here, they're made by Moly, and here is our part number supplied from Summit Racing, our sponsor, of course. Actually, truth be told, this was included in our stroker kit because we are building a 347 stroker, and the kit was completely inclusive, which is awesome, and we'll go over more of that as time goes on, but these came with that kit. Very cool. We can carefully open these. You don't want to scar the bearing in any sort of way. So here's our bearings. Here's our number 3 bearing, and you can tell which side goes into the engine because it'll have a hole. Every single side that goes, up towards the camshaft will have a hole, and that's going to be your oil supply. So you can sort them out by just seeing if they have a hole or not. These all 4 here have holes. This third one also has a hole over here. So these go in our caps and these go in our engine. So what I've done is clean this surface, the bearing surface, and this other surface with a microfiber towel and some carburetor spray, so it's very, very clean. And we can grab our bearing with the hole in it, see? We can line up this tang that sticks out on the bearing with this tang hole in the block. We're just gonna line that up and push down, making sure that this surface is level and this surface is level and it's properly installed. So the only other one you have to kind of be aware of is number 3 here, and you can tell that this is where our thrust surface is going to go because of this machine's surface. This little slot lines up with this surface here, and this is our thrust surface for our crankshaft. And be aware if you're building any other engine as well. This can be anywhere. Sometimes it's on number 5, sometimes it's number 3, and sky's the limit. That's really up to the manufacturer where they want to put this thrust surface, and there's a whole bunch of different reasons why you would change that. So again, you just want to make sure that this tang here lines up with this one here, and I've cleaned this just like the other one. Just set that into its home and push down. Very good. It's properly seated, again making sure this surface is parallel and this surface is parallel, and it looks great. So here are our main caps for our small block Ford. Here's our number 1. I've already cleaned it with carburetor spray and a microfiber towel. So we can flip that over and grab one of our bearings. Again, you can tell this is a cap bearing because there is no hole. Check that out, pretty cool. So just like with our block, our caps are pretty much no different except for the different bearing like I showed earlier. You're just gonna set that in, push it in, make sure your tang or your lock is lined up with the other lock. Push down both sides equally. Make sure this bearing surface is parallel with this surface, and this bearing surface is parallel with this cap surface. And it's installed. Just do that for all 5 of them, and on number 3, use the thrust bearing. All right, now is time for our crankshaft reveal. Here's our stock unit, and I would be reusing the stock unit if I was building a 302. I would just have it remachined. It would be 10 under, and then I'd need 10 under bearings. So if you're gonna go that route, that's what you have to do. But instead, Summit sent over this insane forged stroker kit made by Eagle. The part number and link is down below in the description, and that's going to turn our 302 into a 347 stroker, which is awesome. And it's made by Eagle and forged, just like I said. This is a high-end unit. This is going to make a ton of power and really give us quite a few more cubic inches and more of that low-end grunt we're going to want in our Bronco application. But you might want that in you know, a car application as well, and that's going to be your call. So this Eagle crankshaft came out of the box claiming to be balanced. So at the factory they balanced it and they do an okay job, and you could probably put it in and you might be okay. But I took it to our machine shop and you can see they drilled some new holes. That's a new one right there. And the guy running it said it was off a reasonable amount to where he would not be comfortable putting it in an engine, so you might want to keep that in mind. I would just go ahead and get it rechecked by a machine shop. It is very inexpensive to have them check it, and it's not too bad to have it machined. But if you do that, they might give you this notice, which says, clean the oil holes. So we're going to take care of that before we install it. So I want to show the difference between a stroker crankshaft and a stock crankshaft. Here's our stock one, obviously, and you can see, you can kind of sightline the center line of where it would sit in the block on both, and you can see that this, where the connecting rods mount, is not that far off from the center line, where on this one, it's considerably off. See how much more distance there is from here to here than here to here? So that is where you're getting your extra stroke and therefore your extra cubic inches. So the cleaning the oil holes, we will, and here is one. They all look pretty much just like this, and they all do the same thing with oil distribution, and little metal chips can actually get inside of there during the machining process, during the manufacturing process. You don't know what's in there, so make sure you know that there is nothing in there besides air. So we're going to accomplish that with some nylon bottle brushes, link down below in the description, and some carburetor spray and some compressed air. So what we can do is grab our carburetor spray, spray it down that oil hole, grab our clean bottle brush, and just sink it through a couple times while it's down there. Maybe hit it again. You can't be too clean. And then we can grab some compressed air and blow that out. See, all the way through and then all the way back out. Do that a few times, and again, hit it with our compressed air. Make sure nothing's in there but air. So I've laid my crankshaft down very gently. A lot of people say you really don't want to do it this way, and that's fine. You can put it on its behind. And what we're going to do for its final cleaning, we've already cleaned out all of our oil holes like I showed you. We can just hose it down with some carburetor spray and then blow it dry. Now we can grab our nice and clean crankshaft, and we're going to install it dry for right this moment because we're going to be using a plastigauge. I saw a lot of people had commented, what about a plastigauge? For those of you that don't want to use that, that's totally fine. We built a big block and an LS not using it, so skip to this time to skip this step and just go right to installing your crankshaft for real. So when you're dropping in your crankshaft, just make sure you're doing it completely parallel and not to bind anything anywhere. Just like that, perfect. And don't spin it once you've set it down like this. And the reason we're plastigauging it is to check our bearing clearances, but I can already tell by the way this looks, it's gonna be dead nuts on. And to fasten our main caps today, I will be using my brand new Snap-on half-inch drive 100th anniversary of Snap-on torque wrench. I just got this and I'm really excited about it. So I'm going to be using it, and our first torque step is 22, and then we're going to go 44, and then we're going to go 70, because that's what it says to do on our ARP bolt instructions. And we're only going to plastigauge one bearing, just the front. Those are the fronts correct. They're all gonna be correct because they're using computers these days. It's not like the old days. And honestly, I feel it's unnecessary, but a lot of people think otherwise, so I'm gonna show you that and you can make that decision for yourself. So here is our plastigauge. You can get this at a bunch of different stores, but I will leave a link down below in the description. And you can see that it has measurements on the side, on the outside packaging, so you don't have to worry about that. And inside, you can see this wire is actually our plastigauge, this wire kind of looking stuff. And you just want to take a length of it and lay it completely perpendicular to the bearing surface like this where my finger is, and then you tighten it down, take it back off, and measure how much it's squished. Then we can lay our bit of plastigauge as straight as and perpendicular as you can on that bearing surface, just like that. That looks perfect. Now we can put the cap on. So now we can put our number 1 cap on number 1 here. Making sure we don't disturb our plastigauge. Put our bolts on. I'm just going to get them started with a light ratchet. A little light work with my small ratchet here just to get them down to touch before I get any kind of torque implement out. And you want to do this as evenly as possible. Don't just crank one side down and then the other. Just try to do it as even as you can. That's pretty good. Very cool. And now we can break out our torque implement. So first up is 22 foot-pounds, and that's a 1/2 inch bolt. And my torque wrench hasn't gone off yet. Again, I'm just going to do this as evenly as I can. You don't want to just do one side and then the other. There we go, 22. 22. And now I'm going to boost this up to 44 because we want this to be about as equal as we can. And now we can go to 44. Perfect. That was 44. Now we can go all the way up to our factory recommendation from ARP to 70. There we go. Let's go ahead and bring her up to 70. There we go for one side. And there we go for the other. Perfect. So at this stage, you're going to be tempted to turn the crankshaft. Don't, because you'll ruin your plastigauge. And now we can take the cap back off. So now we can take our bolts back off. And again, we're just going to loosen them a little bit at a time. We want to go in small increments here. Just try to keep it as even as possible. There we go. Now we can move our cap. So we grab our plastic hammer just like before in the other videos. We can kind of just walk it back and forth and off, just like that, and lift straight up. Now you can see our squish. All right, so our bearing clearance is going to be measured right here, right now with our plastigauge, and you want to be anywhere between 100 thousandths and 200 thousandths. And you can see, check that out, we are right at 1.5 thousandths, so we're right in the range. It's perfect. So now we know our bearing clearance. We can grab our fingernail and just clean that off as best we can away from our beautiful internals. Have some carb spray and a towel, and we're just going to clean that plastigauge right off. There we go, and you can do this for all of your main caps and all of your connecting rods, but we're not going to. I just want to show you how it's done. So now we can grab our crankshaft and take that straight up and out because we have to lubricate it. Just like that. Perfect. So here we have our number 3 bearing, and I'm showing you number 3 because it has this thrust surface, and it's the only one to have that, but it does share this common bearing surface like all the other bearings do. And what we're going to do is grab some more of our best friend, Permatex Ultra Slick, and we're going to put some on our finger, and we're going to put it on the bearing wear surfaces, going up to about here on the bearing, or about here on the bearing. You don't want it to get anywhere here where my pinky finger is, because you don't want it seeping behind the bearing and the block, because you can spin a bearing that way. So you just want to put a bit of lubrication on this bearing surface, not going too high on it. And this applies to all the bearings, and what doesn't apply to all the bearings is this thrust surface, and you want to give that the same treatment on both sides. You know, nearly all the way up, but not quite, so it doesn't get in between the bearing and the block. And there we go. So lube all of our bearings just like that, including our caps. So with all our bearings nice and lubricated, you can see how gleaming and red they are there. We can go ahead and drop our crankshaft in just like before. nice and carefully. Just like that, perfect. Now, do not spin the crankshaft yet. Do not spin it. Leave it exactly how it is. I don't care what happens, don't spin it. So now we have our lubricated bearing, just like I showed earlier. We only go up so far, not all the way. And we can put that on, making sure that we have it on the correct orientation, and you can always tell because the lock will go to the lock. And we can put that on, number 1, pointing forward, so we know that's correct. Set that in its home, and we can do that for the rest of our caps. Just making sure you get the correct cap, going the correct orientation. And luckily with our engine it's pretty easy because they're all numbered and labeled forward. Put number 3 in, here's number 4 pointing forward. Very easy. And then number 5 is pretty distinct. There we go. So here is one of our main cap bolts sent over by Summit Racing in a big kit. You actually have to give these to the machine shop so they can do the machine work. That's why I don't have the box for them. But I do have the lubricant for it, and as per the instructions, what you need to do is lubricate your threads. You need to lubricate under the head of the bolt, just like that, and then for our washer, this is really important. On all these washers, it has a beveled side. You see that little beveled edge? That needs to head straight up into the head of the bolt. So it needs to go like this. Now, before we do that, we're going to lubricate the bottom side of the washer, the non-beveled side. Perfect. And then we can put that on. And look, everything is nice and lubricated. Do this for every single main cap bolt. I'm only gonna go over it once and we're gonna install them all. So the only one out of this kit that's kind of the oddball is this bolt, and this contains a stud for the oil pickup, and it goes, for our application, it goes on number 3 on the left hole, just like that. But all the rest are exactly the same, so we're just gonna go ahead and put those on by a few threads. Alright, so what we're going to do is, in sequence, we're going to bring these down just a touch, and I have the sequence right here for you. So we're going to be following this pattern no matter what we're doing, so we're just going to keep going in sequence, and I'm just bringing them down to touch. I'm not torquing anything down just yet, okay? So we're going to follow our sequence and go for number 1 right here, just snugging those down just very lightly. 2 and 3's over here, and then 4, very cool. And then number 5 is going to be this guy here. When you're on the same cap and you're this far away, just try to do them as evenly as possible, but do try to follow the sequence at the same time. Very lightly tightening these bad boys down. There we go, that's plenty. We just did 6, we're on to 7, that's over here. Just bringing these down to touch. Perfect, and then number 9 is this guy here. Gotta switch sockets to 11/16 for this big boy. Just down to touch. Okay, so everything's tightened down to like 2 or 3 foot-pounds. It's very, very light, so now we can set our thrust bearing. So on number 3 here, that's our thrust surface. That's why we haven't, torqued it down all the way. We want those to line up, and the way you can do that is with it, at like 2 or 3 pounds, real light. We can grab a plastic hammer and tap the front of our crankshaft, and then tap the rear of our crankshaft. And there we go. We know that that thrust surface is going to be set and everything's going to be tightened down correctly. All right, with our fancy pants torque wrench loaded up to 22 foot-pounds, we can start with number 1 here. 22. Number 2 is this one. Number 3 is this guy over here. Number 4 is just across from that. Number 5 is this one. Number 6 is just across. Number 7's on the back. Number 8 is this guy. Number 9 is this guy. And the final one requires our 11/16 socket. There we go. Our first stage is done. Now we can turn our torque wrench up to 44 foot-pounds. Up our 1/2-inch socket again and repeat our sequence. Sorry if it's going to be repetitive. It needs to be in 3 equal stages. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Needs our bigger socket. Perfect. Now we're on to our last stage. This one's the tough one. This is all the way up to 70 foot-pounds. So having a larger torque wrench is always nice. All right, and repeat our sequence for the 3rd and final time. 1 to 70, 2, 70, 3, 70, 4, there we go, 70, 5, 6, there we go, 7, 8, 9, and our good friend number 10 here is our final guy. There we go. Perfect. So now with our crankshaft nice and tightened down, this is where you can come if you have skipped your plastigauging step. This is why I feel like that's a little unnecessary at this level. Maybe it's more necessary at a race car level, but just for your home build, not really that big of a deal because you should be able to grab it, and if it doesn't jiggle, you're pretty good. And if it spins, just like this, you're also perfect. Because either if it was too small, this would be really tough, or this wouldn't turn at all. If it's too big, it'd jiggle all over the place. You'd hear it going tick, 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 tick. But this one is absolutely perfect. So what I have here is my dial indicator. For the record, I think this step is completely unnecessary. I have built a big block and an LS on this show, not doing this, but a lot of people have asked me about it. So here I have my dial indicator rigged up, magnetically attached to the front of our engine, and it is zeroed out on our crankshaft. So what I'm going to do is take a prying implement and put it in between the main cap and one of the weights of the crankshaft, and I'm going to be able to move that, and you should see the needle jump anywhere from 1/1000th to 1.5 thousandths of an inch. See that needle move? Moved a little bit over 1. So we're at like 1.5 thousandths of crankshaft thrust play. And at the end of the day, especially when you're at this critical step and the complete bottom end and top end is exposed, protect your investment. You're spending thousands on this thing with some plastic.
Summit provided, of course, and the link is down below in the description.
Thank you so very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future 302 build update videos. Thank you Summit Racing for sponsoring us. Make sure you go check them out. If I've earned your like and subscription here today, I would really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.
Oh yeah, look at it spin. Look at it go. R347's gonna make some serious power.